SPOC webinar of 2021. Let's Talk Palm Oil meets the experts. John Fitri, thank you so much for being here. John, I realize it's 5 a.m. for you as we discussed, so a special thanks to you. My name is Marieke Leegwater and I'm honored to lead this webinar series from the SPOC initiative. And today I'm joined by Fitri Hasibuan and John Buchanan of Conservation International. And during this webinar, we'll talk about the impact of palm oil production on the ground in North Sumatra and Aceh, the Coalition of Sustainable Livelihoods that's active in North Sumatra and Aceh. And we can talk about, let's say, the role of Europeans, but also others, and how we can deal with this palm oil situation. Before we get started, just to inform, as you have seen, you can all use the Q&A function. Maybe technical team, can we take the next slide? You can do questions via the Q&A. I will try to pick them up. You can vote each other's questions up and down. I think only up, by the way. So then I will know what are the most relevant questions. This session will be recorded so that we can send the link to the participants. So with that, thanks all for being here. I love your company and I love that you allow me to do this and learn. And I would like to propose we dig right in. So, John Fitri, can you tell me a little bit about yourselves? What makes you tick and why do you work on this topic of palm oil? Maybe, Fitri, do you want to start?
Yes, sure, Marieke. Thanks for organizing this. So, yeah, I think it's related to my background. So I have a degree in agriculture and environment at the same time, and also had quite a lot of experiences working with the community in rural area. So the combination of these in this topic, like technically, I had some sense of what can to be improved to increase the productivity of palm, especially at smallholder level. But we know that smallholder they have some limitation and so on. And environmentally, we know that if the plantation expanded to the forest area, it will cause problems, environmental degradation, and it won't be sustainable. So yeah, it's more importantly, like I'm from here, North Sumatra. So with my background and the resources, I'm working with CI here. I want to contribute to be part of the solution.
Thanks. Thank you. I think part of the solution, that's an important thought to bring along. And John, can I ask you to give me also your reflections? We've known each other for ages, so I like that we are here in this webinar together.
We have indeed. So thanks, Marky and team for organizing this, and thanks to everybody for joining us today. I should say thanks to the world's coffee farmers, because I'm brought to you here at 5 a.m. this morning by the magic of coffee. So a heads up to them as well. Shout out. But so, you know, to your question, why am I here? You know, if you go way back, and I will admit, I was one of those kids that was always off running around in the woods, turning over logs and looking under rocks and, you know, playing in streams, looking for critters. And so I just had that fascination for the natural world from a little kid. But it was just a kid fascination, right? And, you know, didn't think anything of it and grew up and went to work in the business world out of school. And I got an assignment that had me doing a lot of travel to Central and South America. And that was, for me, super thrilling because I got the opportunity then to get out in the rainforest, this thing I'd grown up as a kid just seeing in documentaries and so forth. And it was an opportunity to actually get out there and see this. And I did it every chance I got. But you know, what I saw over time is, and it, you know, you don't have to be a trained expert or scientist to recognize that there's some themes and trends you can spot between poverty and deforestation and care of the natural world. And so that really got me thinking. And so as I started looking about thinking about a career change, and now I'm going back a couple decades, it was pretty clear where I wanted to work, and it was at that nexus of conservation and sustainable development. And so that's what brought me to this field. And I think palm oil is a great example of that, because it really brings those two issues together, and as we know, sometimes in some conflictual ways, but it is still comes down to that fundamental issue of how do we help people improve their livelihoods and their lives of themselves and their kids and communities, but do so in a way that isn't degrading the natural world around us.
Thank you. Thank you. I see that in the meantime, we get some great pictures of you. John, can you tell, where are you here?
This actually, so Fitri nailed this by email earlier. We were chatting and she nailed it exactly. This is in North Sumatra, in a near place called Siparak, and it's on the outside of one of the parts of the Batang Toru forest. And around you, it's an area with that's a lot of geothermal activity, and it was this. I don't know how to describe it. I'm sure there's a more technical way to describe it, but it was basically a big field of boiling mud. And it was the most surreal thing I've ever seen and visited. And it's just kind of right there off the side of the road. And as you can see, though, the forests behind are really beautiful and in quite good shape. And that's actually one of the areas where the Tapanuli orangutan lives. So really, really important area. And then in some of the lowland elevations in the same areas is where there's a lot of palm oil production.
Yeah, thank you. So, and I also saw a picture of you, Fitri. Can we bring that out again? So what's happening here?
Yeah, it was a picture of me and the community of Binasari. It's one of the community that we supported in South Tapanuli, North Sumatra. So I think after, like, just before this photo, the community and the government in here, Forest Management Unit, just signed an agreement. It's community conservation agreement. So the community agreed to work together with the Forest Management Unit to protect the area, and they will receive some support, some assistance from the Forest Management Unit and from CI to improve their livelihood.
Oh, that's really interesting. So you're telling, I know we have a script, but I'm tempted to ask about this this orang-utang. Is it a very special species living there, Fitri?
Yeah, it's I think the orangutan, it is announced as a new species in 2017, if I'm not mistaken. So yeah, in Sumatra, there's two types of, or two species of orangutan. The one is Sumatran orangutan, and this one, the one in Batang Toru ecosystem, this is the only habitat of this species. And I think the population is about 800 orangutans. So yeah, it is the only, and the picture that John took is one of the ecosystem. So yeah, it's the rarest great apes in the world.
Wow, that gives me the goosebumps actually, because 800 is not a lot. So do you think you'll be able to conserve these special orang-utangs in this area? Or they will be conserved? What do you think?
Yeah, there's a lot of conservation efforts done by many actors, government, NGOs, and also like companies. All are contributing, are working, I would say, like very hard, because it's a long work and it's not an easy. It's a good collaboration. There's some like threats, maybe from community, or maybe from someone else, but there's a lot of forum also established. Just the idea is to protect this habitat. So some forum related to focus on the species, and the other forum focus on the community engagement or watershed protection. So there's a lot of efforts going on, and I believe that we saw that some good trends. in terms of the participation and in terms of investment. So I think it's a good sign.
So you're hopeful that we can, through our efforts, be able to conserve this species, if I get this right?
Yeah, there's a lot of conservation actions or effort ongoing, but at the same time, we will still need to inform to build awareness of the people and build awareness of the decision makers or investors. So there's a lot of things going. So not only the conservation is one part, but the other part, it's building awareness of the people. It's also important.
Thank you, thank you. I'd like to go back to my script a little bit. John Fitri, can you tell me, because what I see in the media is that deforestation in Indonesia seems to be going down quite significantly. Technical team, maybe we can bring out this slide. Yeah, thank you. I would like to ask, is this also the trend you perceive in North Sumatra and Aceh? And can you maybe say something about what you suspect to be behind that trend? Maybe first to Fitri? Yeah.
Yeah, so thanks, Marike. Yeah, that's the data that we have, and we can see that in the field as well. The trend of the deforestation rate decline quite significantly. So, I think in the past, or maybe still now, like many of us thinking about the way what we are working on this production and environmental protection is. We know that like many of us thinking about that two things are separate, and this is the idea or the perspective of many of stakeholders, including the stakeholder that we are working in the area in North Sumatra in South of Tapanuli. It can be too many things. People think like a sectoral base, but at CI, I think since 2012, we started a program called Sustainable Landscape Partnership, which is about managing a landscape by considering multi-perspective, like a natural capital, production, and community live inside that system, governance, and also land use in the landscape. So I think what we can say from the works that we've done here, for example, the governance that one of our focus from that project is we and with the government, we initiated a collaboration through a multi-stakeholder forum to discuss about many issues, including the palm oil sustainability, mainly about palm oil sustainability. And now one of our partner, UNDP, they build up the initiative and expand with the national government and create FOXP. FOXP basically is Indonesia Sustainable Palm Oil Forum, and also National Action Plan for Sustainable Palm Oil. So they have established the forum and also the action plan. But we also need to recognize that there are also some other actors working in similar initiative. For example, the LTKL, it is basically a district collaboration forum. The idea is to achieve sustainable development goals in Indonesia and many other stakeholders. So now more and more stakeholders working at thinking about jurisdictional approach, thinking about not all forest, just forest, but also forest as part of the production system to help to sustain the production system.
So many actors are taking a very active role to make sure there's a balance between development and forest conservation. That's how I,
right.
Yeah, right. John, do you want to add anything or?
Yeah, I think if you take a step back and look at the trajectory of the palm oil sector and the debates around palm oil, and if you go back 10 or 15 years, the debate was around things like, is it even possible to establish visibility or traceability in the palm oil supply chain? And there was a lot of people saying, just no, it can't be done. No way, it can't be done. And you look to where we are now, and all the big actors have dashboards reflecting their efforts to do just that. Many of the big leading actors are at 70, 80, 90% traceability to mill. We have a whole series now of tools where just about anybody can go and track and understand, where is deforestation happening now, where are the fires happening now. Things like mill lists, again, all the big users, most of them publish their lists. So just on that simple issue of visibility and transparency in the industry, I think we've made enormous progress. And again, that alone, that's just kind of the starting point. But I think that's really good progress. And if you combine that with what groups have done on the ground to develop their own, especially some of the big actors develop their own sustainability programs and implement those and start to work those backwards through their supply chain, I think it's quite positive. There's still a long ways to go, and I think we have some key challenges in getting especially the second and third tier suppliers in the kind of farther reaches of the supply chain to get them more engaged, and also to figure out, again, how to make sustainability work for smallholders and what's the right balance there. But I think, again, good progress on that front. And I think what Fitri alludes to is also really important, because there's also been a shift in the dialogue. And I think there's now greater engagement by governments on both sides, on the demand side and on the production side, that I think is really important. On the demand side, we know about the EU legislation. There's also pending legislation in the US about deforestation, imported deforestation. But I think what's also really exciting is the greater engagement with governments in the producing regions, because as Fitri said, we've got to find that balance between conservation, community and livelihoods and so forth. We're not going to do that without government engagement, without community engagement. And so I think a lot of the emergence of what, the jurisdictional approach and the jurisdictional initiatives that you see happening in several different provinces in Indonesia, in Sabah in Malaysia, in other parts of the world, I think is really encouraging to see that kind of level of engagement by governments. And you even see now, and Fitri mentioned groups like the LTKL, but then there's groups all over Indonesia and with Innobu and WWF and others, like leading these initiatives bottom up, and I think that's really exciting to see. But what's also interesting is that you now have governments in places like Central and South America that are starting to talk about sustainability as a differentiator for their national production. And I think that's really important as well, because again, we really need them to think about what's their incentive, like what's their motivation to push sustainability at a national scale and to drive it through the policy framework. Because I think that's something that we in the consuming countries have to keep in mind is, are we creating the right incentives, and are they getting to the people that matter? And, I think 15, 20 years ago, when a lot of this started, we were focused very specifically on the issues of deforestation. And, that has generated progress, as I've noted, but it's also created some disconnects with key audiences who don't think about stopping deforestation. For them, that may not be seen as a solution. That may be seen as stopping their pathway to growth and development. So, that's generated a ton of conflict, which a lot of the groups on this call know better than I do. So I think what's exciting about the evolution of the jurisdictional initiatives is to see that start to change. And hopefully there's better partnerships and collaborations forming there. They can really move forward with some a more sustainable development approach at a larger scale, and not just through particular companies.
Wow, John, I think you've just captured the key messages of this webinar in like 4 minutes. That's really...
Can I go back to bed?
Really impressive. No, because I have here a full audience that I would really like to encourage to send in their questions, because that's what our promise is, to have a really interactive session with Q&A. So I really like to invite the audience at this point in time to send in their questions, in particular regarding this deforestation topic. While we are waiting for their questions to come in, I would like to, I think, ask one follow-up question to Fitri or John, who wants to take it. I hear that the government is really, let's say, into better conservation. Can I ask, what do you think is behind that? Or what is the reason they are taking this more as a priority?
Yeah, I think it's also the awareness in the country. It's increasing. Not only one of the things it's about the commitments that we have. For example, the Paris commitment. Indonesia commits to reduce emission by 29% with our own self and with external support like 41%, if I'm not mistaken. So there's a commitment out there, but also. I think it's the building the awareness that we said earlier about the importance of the forest and also people living inside the forest. And we understand that there's a lot of people living in the forest area and they rely a lot on the forest resources. Part of the community, they work, like John mentioned about the lowland, and those community are mainly rely on palm oil, but the upstream community, they are mostly rely on agroforestry system. So those two, I think the government try to balance the work supporting the palm oil, but at the same time also like protecting the natural ecosystem, because there's a lot of community also rely on the forest resources, and the community downstream, they also rely on water system from the forest area. And the other thing that I'm thinking, it's like again about the awareness. The Indonesia prone to disaster, so like a flooding, it's like a flash flood. It's something that like there's a lot of like a flash flood happen like maybe almost every year, but it's also like an alarm that natural protection of natural ecosystem is very critical to not only for people livelihood but also to save people lives. And yeah, I hope I answer your question, Marika.
Thank you. I think you did. I do see some follow-up questions in the question list. The first one I'm going to pull directly through you is from Max Uten. The deforestation that's still there, is it related to the bigger companies or is it smallholders? And if it's the latter, how do we help stop illegal infringement without impacting local people's livelihoods?
Yeah, it's mainly like from what we saw, from what we are seeing in the field, it's mainly due to a smallholder. And it's, there's you know, Indonesia is a big population. There's a lot of people, and we have the forest management unit who is responsible to manage the forest. But the forest is very large, and there's a lot of community live near the forest area. The small encroachment here and there in small plots, that's an issue. That's what we are doing right now at CI together with the government, supporting the forest management unit with the patrolling system, monitoring system, but at the same time, we're also helping building the capacity of local community through agroforestry system and improving the productivity of their existing land. So working with those two like a stakeholder in collaboration. So working on the upland for forest protection and then lowland helping the community to improve the productivity.
Thank you. Another question, we're just going to take them because there are many, so let's bring them out. This is also, I think, an interesting one. What solutions or incentives are there to reclaim correct smallholders that have planted palms in what you would call KBK, protected forest areas? Are there any solutions?
Well, I think it's very technical thing, but I would say there's an area that can't be planted with palm. I think it will be, I won't say like on behalf of the government may have the policy related to this, but from my understanding is the government will it will not like a lock the palm if it's like a productive palm. But on the I would say the government will advise to the community to not replant the palm in the area that is not allowed or prohibited for palm. So awareness, building awareness and education and so on, that would be more important rather than ask people to go out or cut the palm. It's not wise, it's not beneficial. But from my perspective, if the policy said that if it's illegal, if it's not, it's prohibited to plant palm, the community can keep the palm until the period it's finished, and they cannot do the replanting.
And Fitri, is that a place where conversion to agroforestry might be a relevant solution to multi-species agroforestry systems?
Yeah, it's also a solution, building the agroforestry system in that palm system, and also improving the practices. If it's like in the like a water catchment, there are a lot of things that they can need to be met, like in terms of like chemicals and so on. So like a good practices, agroforestry system, and no longer palm replanting if it's not in area not illegal for palm.
And Mariki, that was part of, Fitri spoke about the Binasari community earlier. Fitri, correct me if I'm wrong, but that's a good example of where exactly that approach, you guys are working with the communities under a conservation agreement kind of methodology to halt the smallholder-driven expansion in exchange for support to achieving the land tenure through social forestry and conversion to agroforestry systems. Am I reading that right?
That's right. So one of the support is if the community stop expanding their palm to forest area and helping the government to do patrolling and monitoring and so on, they will receive support, as John mentioned about social forestry. It will allow them to use the forest area for agroforestry system or maybe other things that allowed by law. And at the same time, we are also helping the community to support their livelihood, for example, like seedlings, composting, and so on. So the idea is for them to keep the productivity, or at least to increase the productivity from their existing palm. So yeah, they will not lose income.
So increase the productivity of the palms that are rightfully there, and then phase out palms that are placed illegally. Question from Laura Steden. What was the reason for the increase in 2014-15 in the deforestation rate in Indonesia? Do you know that by chance?
I don't have the reason on the top of my head. I don't want to make it up, but I'll check it.
Thank you. John.
I would just say the first thing that comes to mind is price, and there's been some pretty high prices over recent years. They dipped and crashed, but now they're back up on the rebound. So I don't know if that exactly corresponded. I haven't done that, but I'm sure that research has been done. So worth a quick Google on that.
Yeah, there's a really good research by Gavo. It can be found on the internet, and that shows that there's a link between the pricing developments of palm oil and deforestation. So I think the general consensus starts to be that, in order to ensure expansion of palm oil is done in a sustainable way, we need to, let's say, reinforce all the measures we are doing and continue, let's say, investments for standing forests, reward for sustainable practices, because if the price continues to spike, you can expect expansion to kind of start pushing again.
Exactly. History has shown that time and time again, and that is indeed the concern we see right now, because prices have rebounded substantially over the past several months, and now and stocks have dropped significantly, global stocks of palm oil, and so again, that tightening of global stocks suggests that again that pressure on prices is just going to keep going upward, and again, we know what that tends to result in. So I think your point is exactly right, and Fitri alluded to it before of the the solution to sustainable palm oil is not just sustainable palm oil. We need to think about how do we create the right incentives to conserve the forest around it? How do we help the communities, empower the communities? How do we make sure we're appropriately dealing with the labor issues? Like, we've got to look at these things in an integrated fashion, and especially now on the price spikes, with that pressure coming, really important to be thinking about what are those incentives for the forest conservation and better governance, sustainable management of forests, and how do we build the capacity for that? That's really important that we look at this in an integrated fashion and kind of putting all those pieces together.
Thanks, John. Yeah, I agree. I'm going to continue the questions from the audience. I think here from Pauline from Hellerman, we talked about smolder expansions. She asked, aren't there often larger companies behind illegal smolder expansion using them as a front? I've heard this theory before. I don't know how you would evaluate that or rate that.
I didn't see that case, at least in our working area in South Tapanuli in North Sumatra. No, it's most of the palm company there are like a small to medium size, and they've been developed, I think, since 2005 or maybe a little bit earlier, a little bit like later than that. I don't see that trend in the landscape that we work.
There has been a lot of some interesting research in this area of late, and I think it's also important to unpack what do we mean by smallholder, because we know that there's small family farmer, the 2 hectare range, but then there's independent producer that might be 25 to 50 hectares, which is a very different situation, and that's really a small business person. So I think it is important to differentiate between that, and a colleague of mine has done a lot of research kind of looking at some of those patterns of distribution, and you can see that a lot of areas of high deforestation are associated with those kind of larger of the smallholders, if you will. But it's also, it's a great question, because there are definitely examples of that, and it's also why we need to be kind of building these alliances and working through multiple solution pathways, if you will, through the supply chain, through the government, et cetera, because we've got, they're selling that fruit somewhere. So we've got to be, understanding what are the livelihood alternatives for those producers if they're not, establishing illegal palm oil. What are the alternatives? How do we make sure we've got support from government? How do we make sure that those that might be buying that fruit are also participating and not just creating more backdoor markets? It's really why, again, kind of working at the landscape, having those good partners at the local level that can support in that integrated approach is really important.
Yeah, thank you. So in this context, John Fitri, how do you see the role from European players? What can European players do in your perspective?
I think Europe continues to play a really important role. And again, if you step back, it's still really important to continue to send that demand signal that, Europe's is still a key market for palm oil. And it's really important to show that, there's still that demand pull for sustainable palm. And that means that companies should be covering 100% of their volumes. There's a question here about mechanisms. I think the certificates of the book and claim. And I think, book and claim has its place in as companies get started in sourcing sustainable palm, and it has its place for some of the derivatives and more complex products. So I would say that companies should be covering their volumes today by some mechanism, and they need to set those clear targets for how they're going to get, if they're not 100% today, how are they going to get there, and by when? What's that time frame? Hopefully they're already there. But then really importantly is continue to engage the suppliers. How are their suppliers going to address their own footprint and their supply networks? Because again, we mentioned that kind of working back upstream to get to your suppliers and your suppliers' suppliers is really important, as well as pushing the reporting, the monitoring, the tracking, the transparency around the progress, but also the grievances and the challenges as they happen in supply chain. How do we make sure we're aware of those and deal with them when they come up? And then the last point I would talk to, and I mentioned it before, is we really need leading companies around the world, not just in Europe, but a lot of the European companies are leading in this, to be partnering creatively with their suppliers in the producing regions to figure out how are we going to address these really fundamental issues. What I really don't, what we don't want to see companies doing is just kind of cut and clean up their supply chain and walk away. No, they need to figure out what are the important places in their supply chain and what are the challenges in those places and how do they work creatively with the suppliers in those places to deal with those problems so that we can drive a transformation of those places to sustainable production. And that's, again, what I referred to before, the jurisdictional initiatives and approaches that are out there is really a great way, a great way to get at that.
Yeah, thanks, John. I see two questions kind of linked to this topic. The first question is from Simon Olvund. Can you go a little bit more on the point you made on 70 to 80% traceability? Does this include the last mile and individual farm traceability? And what will be the next level value for traceability in palm oil?
A great question, Simon. And I think that, a lot of the scorecards are up online and you can, find them from the companies, the dashboards, reporting dashboards. Most of them are just going to mill. And a lot of them are now in the process of working back to the farm level. And I think that's important. It's also important to be doing that in the highest priority places, or maybe some places that are lower risk. So that's not as essential. So I think kind of that risk-based or prioritized approach is a key way to go.
Thank you. And maybe this goes to Fitri. How is CICSL, Conservation for Sustainable Livelihoods, that we promised to talk about, so maybe you can say a little bit about that, linked to the jurisdictional programs in the regions of Aceh Tamiang? Have you drawn any lessons from the process of Aceh Tamiang so far that could be taken to new jurisdictions that are adopting jurisdictional initiatives? This gets questions from Catherine Demopoulos.
Yeah, I think it's maybe John, you can add about it. But yes, it's Aceh Tamiang is one of the pilot side of the CSL, the Coalition of Sustainable Livelihood. And a lesson learning from what the Aceh Tamiang is doing on the jurisdictional approach. It's something that something that related to the other district. For example, the work that CI is doing in South Tapanuli. So the key of the CSL is about aligning with the government priority and also a lesson learned platform. So lesson learned can be anything. One of the things is the jurisdictional approach, the approach that use in Tamiang and also in other places. And how the community and the government can learn from each other. Maybe the way of the government are doing it is a little bit different, but that's okay. That's part of the lesson learned. And that's also the things that CSL is doing right now, capturing how Aceh Tamiang and how South Tapanuli are working toward that sustainability or toward jurisdictional approach. And then try to invite other partners to learn from it or share the lesson to other partners.
Thanks. Oh, sorry.
Yeah,
Jill,
I would
want
just
to
add on that. I think that's exactly right. And it gets back to the point I raised earlier that, we need to be thinking not just about palm oil, but it's about how do we advance sustainability in these places. And that's how we're going to get to sustainable palm oil. And, the Coalition for Sustainable Livelihoods kind of came from that recognition in part that, like, this is a team sport. We need all the different, actors and stakeholders from local levels to provincial to national, global, supply chain level. And we also need a way to figure out how there's so much great work going on across Indonesia and across palm oil producing regions globally. But a lot of it is still, people get, they're working on their project, they're doing their thing, and that's great. But we've seen that, if we get into silos, that we don't, as Fitu said, we don't share those lessons. We know the government often works in silos, and that can't be the case if we're going to solve these problems. And so the Coalition for Sustainable Livelihoods, part of what it has been trying to do is to create a space, literally and figuratively, a space for different stakeholders to come together to share some of those lessons learned and approaches, and then also to create a space for government, private sector, civil society to try and agree on what are our targets for these specific places. So it's not about like another global dialogue. That's why we call it a place-based platform. It's about, in these places of North Sumatra and Aceh, and then specifically within districts in those places, what's the plan for sustainability? How do we develop that through inclusive processes? And then how do we work together to achieve those targets? And I think the Aceh Tamiang work is a great example of where IDH, Earthworm, Haka, the Loiser Conservation Forum, those guys are doing great work. And so we want to use the platform to try and elevate that, and then figure out how do we share those lessons with groups like CI that are working with our local partners in Tapsel. How do we share that with other groups like Livelihoods Fund that's working over in Labuan Batu? That's part of what the CSL is trying to do, is kind of create that network. And I have to give a shout out to the companies that have supported us, because they've also, brought a lot of intellectual capital to this as well, and pushing on how do we create that space. So groups like Unilever, Mars, Mondelez, PepsiCo, Barry Callebaut have been, great, thought partners and supporters in helping us kind of create this initiative. And it's a, good example of, again, trying to think they're doing their supply chain work, which they need to do. There's no way around that. Companies need to be working with and kind of pushing the advances through their supply chain, but then also trying to work beyond that. And how do we support a transition, at a larger scale going forward? And that's part of what the CSL is trying to support, and kind of trying to create a network, if you will, between those different initiatives that are doing such good work. And I should also give a thanks to the Walmart Foundation, who's supporting the CSL to try and create a small secretariat within Medan to support this effort going forward.
Thanks, John. I realized I forgot one thing, and that is that after this session, we will have like a 25, 30 minutes, depending how nice it is, chat session with Fitri and John. I hope John continues to be as sharp as he is at 5. I think we should wake him at 5 more often. So there are a few questions, like personal questions, that we can do in this chat. And at this moment, I see a very good question from Stefania Rivera. And that's, I think, to the both of you. And I'd like to kind of have it also as a closing, maybe. How can we involve the smallholders in sustainability, governance, and production? Are there best practices from North Sumatra and Aceh in this regard that then can be implemented in other palm-producing regions? So how can we involve smallholders? I think we didn't touch on it yet. Maybe we can also talk a little bit about the role of palm oil in general. Like, why are so many smallholders growing palm oil?
Yeah, I think to answer to your question, Marike, maybe I just share a little bit about the story, my experiences in one of the exchange, like some of the colleges from CI around the world. I think, I don't know, in 16 countries. So came to North Sumatra and tried to learn about like a palm oil, like especially at smallholder level. And we visited one of the villages called Muara Opu. It's a very special village. It's the habitat of like a turtle, leatherback turtle. Yeah, this is one of them. Maybe John will talk about this one later. But yeah, it's when we asked from the community from Muara Opu, and we asked why did they decide why do they decide plant palm oil in the first place? And they said that they've been trying so many crops in the past, like rice or paddy, but then they changed planting palm oil, and they said that they choose palm oil because basically it's about income, it's money, the good income, because they have access to market for their product, and then they need to make a better living, and they have a clear market. They are buyers, they are company. Yeah. And they also said they have other benefit from the infrastructure, road access, road. In the past, the only access to these villages is by boat, and it's pretty dangerous, especially for kids when they are going to school. It's pretty dangerous. But on the other hand, we're fully aware that relying on one community is risky. So, and it will be like a riskier maybe in the long term. And that's, and also not all of the area in North Sumatra or in South Tapanuli where we are working are suitable for palm. So I think this is where we need to work with the community and the government. We need to find a solution, how to diversify the livelihood of the people. It means that sustaining their livelihood also. And more importantly, in the area where palm oil is not suitable or not possible. So how to address that? And this is what we are doing. It's we are making. I think I would say that we are making a good progress, but there's a lot of work need to be done as well for the future.
Thank you. I think this what you say stems very much with my own experience working in the field with palm oil. Like, you know, you ask people about their palms and they tell you, since I grow oil palm, I've been able to send my kids to university or buy shoes or build a stone house, and my livelihood's literally, you know, really improved. So that's, I think, a big reason why people actually choose for palm oil.
Well, that's what this picture is, Mariki, just to explain it here. I mean, this is along the road to the community that Fitri mentioned called Mora Upu, which is, you know, a coastal community. It used to all be forest, and it's now all palm oil, and it's right up against the beach, whereas Fitri mentioned is a big turtle nesting place. But as you go down that road, you know, you have a lot of the, you know, fairly traditional, very modest, you know, wood-sided houses with the corrugated roofs, and you know, row after row of those, and then all of a sudden you come upon a house like this with, you know, tile roofs and columns and kind of marble flooring. Looks, you know, significantly different, and in many of them you see that little crest in the middle, which, and it's kind of hard to see from the picture, that's a palm tree. And so, you know, it's very obvious, like, here's somebody who made their fortune on palm oil. And so again, that's what people look at and see is, you know, that's something to aspire to. And, you know, we had an internal learning trip once. People from different parts of CI come to North Sumatra, and they went to one of the community meetings. And I think some of those folks were a little bit surprised at how enthusiastically, when they talked about palm oil, they're like, oh yeah, we'll do it again. We love palm oil. And, you know, and again, it's for the reasons that Fitri noted. They see this as their pathway to growth and development. And so again, if we come at this saying we must stop deforestation, like, that's not a great way to get people on board when you need those people on board to solve the problem of deforestation. And so we've got to find, what is that common ground? What are those pathways, you know, alternatives? How do we find that right balance between conservation and production? We've got to be bringing those things together. And so, you know, to Stefania's question, I mean, there's a lot of great work going on out there. There's lots of different models. And I think, you know, I'm not sure anybody's found the approach or the solution, but we need to be advancing those models. And it comes back to your question of what should the companies be doing, is supporting that innovation, partnering with your suppliers. If you're a downstream actor, be partnering with your suppliers to advance that innovation, to figure out what is the best model, what's the right set of incentives, how do we deliver them so they get to the right people, so there aren't kind of perverse incentives. Like, we've got to figure those things out, and there's great resources out there, great initiatives that you know, merit support. I'd want to also give a shout out to the Tropical Forest Alliance Jurisdictional Approach Resources Hub. It's a great kind of online resource where there's tons of information about these different jurisdictional initiatives that groups are doing around the world, and it's a really good place to go and learn more and see who's doing what's working, and what are some of the impacts, because that's the type of, you know, we need to be looking for those innovative models that are working and figure out how to advance those.
Thank you, John. I think that's really a great place to kind of end this webinar. So for now, I would like to, I think we learned a lot. I think we learned that we can wake John Buchanan at 5 o'clock in the morning, and he's still razor sharp.
Don't make a habit of it.
And thank you so much, Fitri, for telling us about let's say, your work on the ground and with Tepanuli, I'm not sure I'm saying it right, I'm not a conservation expert, the Tepanuli orangutan, and I'm so glad that you're around to make sure we are at this and we try to preserve what we can.